Welcome, my friends. Welcome to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camel's Challenge. Smoke Camels for 30 days and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. And remember, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. You know, when the white man first met the Indians, he was introduced to tobacco. Instead of appreciating the sacred place that tobacco had in Indian culture, the white man turned to the Indian and said, "This is great stuff. Where can I get some more?" And before you know it, he had packaged it, sold it to the entire world. The health impact has been enormous. But before you uh, dismiss it, check out the new Netflix series based on Michael Pollan's new bestseller, Your Mind on Plants. Let me just share my screen for a moment so I show you what the book looks like. And here it is. There it is. This is Your Mind on Plants. Michael Pollan's a new bestseller. I recommend highly. We'll go back to the screen. There we go. Stop the share. Back here. There we go. So if you haven't heard of him, he's the food critic for the New York Times, and he's 60 years old. He's a professor, and he's written a number of best-selling books on food. His latest book is about psychedelics, and it starts off. It's saying that he wanted to try to start with LSD, but the ceremonial guide suggested to him the choice of Native Americans, tobacco. Go watch what happens to him when she has a concentrated dose of tobacco smoke. He holds his nose, she sprays it up, he breathes it in, and he like this, and and she touches him, and he describes the experience, the intense, incredible experience that the tobacco has on his body and his mind. It reminded me of aspects of my camel experience, of my smoking experience in general. If you do take the Camel's Challenge, you won't be able to smoke a whole cigarette. I would suggest one toke. I remember in the mornings when I would take my first cigarette in the morning, you can't stand up afterward. The intoxication is absolutely intense. Tobacco is a powerful, powerful plant. And what the white man did to tobacco was take something sacred and turned it into a sacrilege by focusing on the addictive qualities only and stripping it of all of its spiritual value. Tobacco is meant to be appreciated, not made the subject of racist anti-smoking campaigns. So don't be a Nazi. Take the Camel's Challenge. More bad news. From Morocco through Spain, France, and England, Europe is ablaze this week. Temperature records are being made all across Europe. In the famous heat wave of 2003, more than 70,000 Europeans died. Fires are now raging across Europe, including in France, Spain, Portugal, Croatia, and Greece. In the UK, London was on fire, and the London fire brigades were completely overwhelmed. Basically, Europe is today a dystopian hellscape. UN Secretary Antonio Guterres, who is normally very reserved, said, quote, "Humanity faces collective suicide." And there's more bad news still. The pandemic is not burning itself out. In England, the National Health Service says that there were more people sick in January 2022 than in April 2020. It may not be as severe, but it's not the flu either. And long COVID, which affects 20 to 30% of the people who actually get COVID, who survive the acute phase, is devastating their healthcare system. In England, NHS workers are the second highest profession for cases of long COVID, which can be seriously disabling. As a result, the healthcare workers are burning out, and it is crippling the ability of to provide health services. The same is happening here in the US. And besides the pandemic, we have an epidemic of gun violence, which we also refuse to do anything to curtail. The stress on our social systems is enormous. So last week, I mentioned my friend Gordon Henry, and I wanted to show you this is another book that Gordy was involved in. He's a co-author. and this is on the Ojibwe. And he has a story from Francis Cree, who I also previously had mentioned. I went to the Sundance. Francis Cree was the medicine man who led the dance. He said that in the darkest times, when the people were dying, the pandemic was raging, the people were starving, some of the elders didn't want to be a burden, so they would go off to die. But when one of the elders went off to die, an eagle came and taught him that he could still be useful. He could justify his existence by imparting wisdom from the past to the young people. At a time when abortion is always the moral choice, we are making it impossible to prevent the birth of untold numbers of unwanted children who cannot be cared for and who will be a burden on an already collapsing social system. The only people who should be having children today are those who really want to have children. Forcing women to bear children, regardless of the circumstances of their pregnancy, of their health, of their ability to cope, or its impact on her family, is absolutely unconscionable. So this week's New Yorker has an essay by Philip Deloria, the son of the legendary Rhyme Deloria, author of Custer Died for Your Sins. Philip Deloria is a professor at Harvard University. And the article is about the 5 civilized tribes of the Southwest, the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole. They were called civilized because they maintained trading relationships with the white people. They had an interest in education and Christianity. They adopted constitutions. They had lawyers. They enslaved Black people. As I've said, no strategy actually worked to save Native peoples from genocide, and being civilized certainly didn't help. They ended up being removed from their land in a ethnic cleansing that was called the Trail of Tears. But during the Reconstruction, the federal government decided that the people whose ancestors, they had moved to Oklahoma, and they took their slaves with them. And in Reconstruction, the federal government decided that the people whose ancestors had been enslaved, these tribes should be considered members of the tribe. Many of them settled among Native communities, shared their language, their culture, children, for generations. They had been accepted as members of these communities, even recognized as such by the federal government. But starting with the Muskogee, or the Creek, more commonly known as the Creek, in 1979, these tribes began to rewrite their constitutions, defining tribal membership by blood and dropping former slaves from tribal membership. Until I'd spent time with Native peoples, I'd never thought of the idea of blood or blood quantum, a system that the US government and many tribes use to measure Native ancestry and eligibility for membership. Blood quantum, BQ, is based on a formula. It is the combined degree of Indian blood an individual's parents possess. So you could be a quarter Cherokee and an eighth Chickasaw, etc. The former slaves shared the language, culture, intermarried, children through multiple generations. They had been accepted as members of the community and recognized by the federal government. But beginning in 1979, they were purged from tribal memberships. By the way, they weren't all the same. The Seminoles proved the most open to Black citizenship, the Chickasaw and the Choctaw at the least, with the Cherokees and the Creeks somewhere in between. If you had one drop of Black blood, you were Black. If you were mixed Indian and white, you were Indian. So if you were mixed Indian and Black, you were Black. If you were mixed Indian and white, you were Indian. The racial strife worked both ways. Frederick Douglass assured a crowd in 1869, quote, "The Negro is more like the white man than the Indian in his tastes and tendencies and dispositions to accept civilization. Where the Indian rejects civilization," he went on, "it is not so with the Negro, who loves you and remains with you, and under all circumstances, in slavery and in freedom." I want you to know that the Jews were just like this. They, we are just like you white people. We love you, and we're just like you, and we're not like Black people. So in the South, in order to be accepted, they wanted to identify with the dominant group, which it seems is what's happening here. There is an encouraging end to this story, at least. Last year, the Cherokee Supreme Court ruled that freedom rights extend to the descendants of freedmen as a birthright springing from their ancestors' oppression and displacement as people of color. We might want to take to heart that Native Americans and African Americans have earned their right as a birthright springing from their ancestors' oppression. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week, 2 weeks from now. We are in the 3 weeks of mourning. 2 weeks is Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. Fast that day. I'm not sure whether we'll have a program or not. We'll see. In the meantime, take the Camels Challenge, smoke camels, and see what a difference it can make in your life.